Good morning, you guys, and welcome to Connecting the Dots. This is so exciting to have all of you here. I'm Katie Stebbins, and I've got Carter Williams with me from iSelectFund. I've got Ellen Brown from BP2 Health, and our guest today is Brad Fruth from Beck's Hybrids. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks,
Morning.
Katie. Morning.
So we're going to cover a range of topics today. We're going to start off in our first segment just covering some of the hot topics that we all talk about behind the scenes on a daily basis. Now we can air them out in public with each other. We're going to go into a second segment where we get to talk to you, Brad, and really go deep into the seed economy, seed culture, and understand how you're disrupting the agricultural landscape of the U.S. and agroeconomy. Carter, we're definitely going to dig into food is health, a mantra that you enjoy banging the drum on all the time, which will be great and juicy. And I think we're going to wrap it up with the national juicy conversation of GLP-1s, which I think will find the thread that we pull it all through with. So with that, I think we should kick this off. Sound good, you guys?
Yeah, sounds good.
Absolutely.
All right. So I wait on bated breath with each of you to post on your LinkedIn about all these exciting things that you learn. I don't post anything I learn because I just read what you write, but I do learn. So one of the things that's been an interesting throughput, and Ellen, on your latest post, which if any of you have seen the LinkedIn's, the artwork that you're posting is quite phenomenal on AI, but one of the things that came up as a thread was the relationship that employers have in this big mix of food is health, healthcare, how we're going to eat and be healthy humans. And I think it's easy to think about the payer system, the insurance companies. It's easier to think about the providers, the healthcare, the actual healthcare providers. But Ellen, talk a little bit about where employers fit into this, because it's not just the place where you buy your insurance if you have a full-time job. It's more than that, isn't it?
It absolutely is. So this will be fun because we have a bunch of people learning who know a lot about food and agriculture. Then you have a bunch of people that are really interested in food as health, right? So they understand a little bit about both. And then you're going to have a whole bunch of people that know a lot about healthcare. So I'm going to go after this, and I think we all will, as somebody that's kind of in the middle. You don't necessarily know that much. I think what a lot of people don't understand is that it's not really about, to your point, Katie, it's not really about the payers in all of this, the health plans. It's really about who holds the insurance risk. And who holds the insurance risk really drives the decision-making and the benefit design and all of these things. So when we talk about food as health, it's something that is inextricably linked for most people. When we talk about it in relationship to healthcare, a lot of people go back to their healthcare benefits because people think of food as medicine. Right now, that's sort of the term that's being thrown around, which is really a benefit.
Well, yeah, but I'm going to push back on that a little bit, Ellen. Most of us think about food as medicine. That's a big statement. I would say the minority of us think about food as medicine or food as health.
Fair enough.
It's an emerging, burgeoning concept.
Okay, so then with that, very fair. I'm going to say that if you think of food as medicine, as the term, you need to move to food as health. And I think a lot of people glom to food as medicine because it's really related to benefits. And that's an easy thing for people to get their head around, right? I have a benefit, I use it, it's paid for. But what happens is with benefit design, that's where the employer steps in. So unless you happen to be an individual who picks your own insurance, right? You buy your own insurance, you're not covered through an employer, or you're in a small employer and you have to buy through the marketplace, your employer picks your health plan for you. You don't have choice. And so that means that you have no ability to influence who is selected. You have no ability to influence what's covered, what's paid for, how much things are paid for. And so unfortunately, it's driven us to a point of really sick care because it's actually cheaper for a lot of people who have traditional commercial insurance. So large employers, unless they're in a high deductible health plan, which half of commercial population is, the other half are in health plans that have $25 copays, $50 copays, right? These different copays. And it is easier for them to go see the doctor and have a prescription for insulin or metformin or one of these things to offset their lifestyle disease and quote unquote manage it through medication, or like Ozempic, we're going to talk about that later, than it is for them to learn how to eat the food that they need to eat and make the change in their lifestyle that they need to reverse lifestyle disease. So,
yeah, and I would say, Ellen, what's interesting, I would offer that some of that is cultural. It's an interesting cultural phenomenon, right? So I grew up going to the doctor with my mom, who would go in and I'd watch her maybe pay a copay, right? And I'd go get my physical. And then when I became an adult, my mom's like, you've got to go get a general practitioner. You got to go to a doctor, and then you got to get healthcare. And okay, so then I go and I pay my little $10 or $20 copay. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing this just the way my mom used to do it. Like I'm such an adult, right? And once a year I go and I get this done. And if something's not feeling right, I call and I'm like, hey, can I come see you? And then I have kids, right? So now my kids are like, oh, I go and get a job so I can do this. So I do think there's an interesting cultural phenomenon in that it's not about a choice. It's not that we're choosing, hey, let's do this and stay healthy and let's do that. It's that there is a culture in our country of this is just how it's done.
Absolutely. And then I'll say one more thing, and then I know Carter's going to have a lot to weigh in here. The other piece to this is because benefit design is focused on the sick care system, now we have this ever-growing segment of folks that have the financial means that they're realizing that the sick care system is not meeting their needs on becoming healthier. And I'm not talking about wellness and prevention here. I'm talking about really owning our health and our long-term longevity, right? And our health span, as a lot of people say. And so they're quote unquote health hacking. And I think, podcasts, social media, things like that have really made the information more accessible. So things like Function Health, which we've seen, right? Where people are like, fine, I go to my primary care physician. They do what they're going to do. They have their set, but I want to know my baseline. I want to know a deeper level about my own health and where I stand. And that comes outside of the purview of your traditional health plan benefits. And that's unfortunate. Now, I'm not going to get into the nuances that if you're self-insured and your employer is putting you in a high deductible health plan and you have an HSA and you can use those dollars, right? Like I'm going to leave that out for this quick conversation.
It's a multi-layered sandwich.
It
totally. We're speaking from our own lived experience and our own daily. Yeah.
But my point is when people say healthcare is broken, to me, the employer segment and the fact that employees don't make these choices, they don't have the purchasing power to do that, then we are stuck in a system that I think that's a broken element of it. Carter, you weigh in.
Any particular point? I do want to just clarify this. What we are generally talking about, I think collectively, is food is health. And then there's the term of food is medicine. Food is medicine is a bit more of you're in the healthcare system, diabetes getting out of control. We really need to step in some way to use food as a solution to deal with your diabetes or metabolic disease. Long ago in my life, I was involved in manufacturing. We had really big QA quality control problems, and we started to do Six Sigma. We didn't add more quality control engineers. We redesigned the product to make it so it didn't have errors. Food is health is much more about the fact that you should be able to walk into a grocery store and not make a bad choice. There are various reasons why the food has shifted in particular ways that right now we've got a better understanding of it and we can make better decisions. But then when we think about if food is health, if we should be able to walk into a grocery store and not make a bad decision, what might that look like? And in my post this weekend, I made this reference to if someone invented the motorcycle today, would anybody let it happen? I mean, it's sort of crazy. This thing drives around. And when I was an EMT, we used to call motorcyclists organ donors.
Oh, God.
So the notion is that there, in some way, we maybe need to start twisting our mind to say, not just like, oh, yeah, it'd be better if we eat better, but like, what is the delivery mechanism different? Should groceries step in and take over some of the function of healthcare?
Exactly, Carter. I mean, I think I'd like for you to push on that a little more in terms of, we talk about these iPhone moments, right? These shifts in our society. And I just described healthcare as a cultural norm. So I
Yeah.
think one of the things I'm wondering about is what are the shifts to new cultural norms? It may be like, what is the new cultural norm we need to shift to in a grocery store? What is the new cultural norm we need to shift to as we interact with our own health? There's going to have to be these moments where the new normal becomes normal. And what are the tipping points? Malcolm Gladwell talks about tipping points. What are some of the tipping points, Carter, you think might be coming that will create new norms over the next 10 years?
Yeah, so it bugs me every day because before you never quite know what it is, but afterwards it's obvious.
Totally,
but
it's maddening.
I think things like Ozempic's a little bit of a subject that some people not in love with, but
Yeah.
when you see Costco also offering Ozempic now, part of that might be they're just being opportunistic, but the other part is if you're going to the grocery store twice a week and you need to maybe use something like Ozempic because you got a BMI 35, but you also need some nutritional coaching, all of a sudden you can start to look at that grocery experience as something that can maybe touch on the nutritional coaching side in a way that the thought that you would go to your doctor twice a week to get coaching on how to eat better.
Right.
So the form factor around the grocery store, but then when you look at like meals ready to eat, I saw some numbers that said something like nearly 70% of the cost of food is everything after it leaves the farm.
Mm.
And so there's a cost structure in there that says maybe even the grocery store is too expensive. And there's a little bit of conversation that meals ready to eat might be just less expensive to deliver quality meals ready to eat. And then when you throw in the Ozempic thing back in, that's causing a calorie reduction of about 25% in demand from the drug. All of a sudden, the building blocks of it should be easier at the grocery store. Maybe the form factor is a little bit different, but none of it is add more doctors.
No. But remember, we have a digital component here that's coming in. And Ellen, as we move to a world where we seem to be online or on an app or something for doing anything, the form factor may not be that our feet are walking us around making a decision. We could be on telemedicine. We could be in our telegrocery store. Both could be telling us what to do before we go into our telegym. It seems that this digital world is going to have a vast and continuing influence on how we make these decisions.
So employers, cultural norms. We are used to our employer selecting our health plan and our health plan paying for as much of what we perceive as healthcare as possible. I mean, all of us can use examples of friends that we know who are basically withholding care or waiting too long for care because they're waiting to get an appointment with a certain specialist because that's covered by their health insurance. That's right. A huge cultural norm, Katie. Exactly what you said. So whether the employers are no longer the ones making the decision or not, we the employees, we the people need to make our own decisions. And that gets back to, Carter, your point. So it's like, well, I'm just not going to invest my money here. I'm going to invest my money over there, right? And then you get into, I think we've also missed a really important piece to this, which is people don't know what they don't know. We are deep in this space, but people don't understand. The average person doesn't understand that 75% of the food, of the SKUs available to us, even just the food available to us, is actually, as Robert Lustig would say, poison. Like that. So the grocery store, I love, Carter, that's like the first conversation I think you and I ever had when we met was re-engineer the grocery store, and it becomes kind of the gateway. It is healthcare in essence, right? But that's a paradigm shift. It's, so.
Yeah.
It is, but I want to come, Carter, I want to take that moment, and this I think will tie into Brad, where we've got to pull you in, is one of the things you talked about in your lessons learned this week was around, food security is national security. And when I think about empty shelves and I think about run on things, and we've had this debate at the Innovation Institute, certainly shelf stability is a critical point of our food system. I don't think any of us could argue that we can feed the planet with no shelf stable food and everything has to be fresh.
Yep.
Things have got to be processed to be shelf stable. Things need to be fortified. We have a lot of fortified foods for a lot of reasons. Just, Carter, reflect on that for a second. And I think then we can transition into thinking a little bit about biofortification in our food economy. But first, talk about food security, national security, and
Basically, it was triggered. My comment was triggered a teeny bit, both from the Lenin quote that says, we're three meals away from anarchy. If you can't eat, it's a big deal. That relates both to the U.S. and here. So Ambassador Kip Tom had made the point in a recent post about this. He was Ambassador of World Food Program, very involved in agriculture policy, and that the where the U.S. fits into the overall food system when China's buying a lot of grain and such from the U.S. A lot of motivation for China to get into a conflict with us, or for them to get us to get into a conflict with them. So that's one aspect of the food security is national security. The other aspect is the ability to robustly provide crops to feed everybody in a healthy way so that people are healthy and vital and happy and all that sort of thing. And what is sort of shifting a little bit is our national security policy, and this is what Dari certainly raises many times, is post World War II was get a lot of calories out there.
Yeah.
Now we've got a lot of calories out there, and so famine is not a very common thing, or is not really a tool of war of like, let's shut down their food for 3 days and see if they resist. We're starting to move to a point where, as we think about some international problems, that the skills of the United States, and so this takes a little bit, is the great thing about American agriculture that we grow the crop, or is the great thing the software to grow the crop, the technology and the knowledge and the agronomy and all of the things that go into growing the crop well? And what's starting to happen, and this is what Beck's is doing and what we're starting to see, is the notion that the U.S. is, one, the center point of the universe in terms of yield and production, but two, the practices that we have allow us in sort of a Lenin kind of way to not only just ship grain to other places, but take the technology package that makes agriculture effective and make it available. A good example of that is there's a lot of production moving out of California on fresh down to Peru.
Mm.
And really the people in Peru are taking the best of U.S. agronomy. They don't have a labor problem, so they're not so worried about labor, but they're taking the best of U.S. agronomy and they're upshifting Peru's production capability to be at yield parity with the U.S. in terms of quality. And so as we think about food as health and how we deliver affordable nutrition, meaning, we want high quality nutrition without raising cost. So as we think about doing that, we should start breaking this conversation down into the hardware. I'm actually growing and building this stuff, and the software, there's this swirling a bunch of technology that can pull it off, and the U.S. excels at both.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I love the History Channel series, The Food That Built America. I don't know if you guys watch it, but it's sort of it shows the Industrial Revolution invention of the modern day food system. And it breaks it down by all these inventions, and it talks about candies and cereals and sugars and all the big titans of food. It's fascinating. You really should watch it. But when you're talking about that, Carter and Ellen, when you're also talking about this shift towards being able to biohack and functional health and things, it's very interesting. We constantly have this tug of war between this handed down, think of the machinist, Carter, and the machinist is no different than the nurse who's been practicing for 30, 40 years, and you walk into her office and she can tell you immediately what's wrong with you. I love the older nurses who, without doing any diagnostics, can immediately say what's wrong. Just like I can go to an older machinist with a blueprint and they're like, you can't make that. I don't care what your AI algorithm told you, you can't make that at scale. So there's a push-pull always between the old school, what we know, and the new world of what we're learning. What worries me is at some point generationally, we're going to lose some of that, the old school knowledge, and we're going to be relying more on the new modern digital knowledge. There's got to be a way to capture some of it. But as you were describing that, it just made me think about there are two worlds, right, that are always pushing and pulling and working together. But I wonder if there's going to be eventually a sunsetting of those in both
It'll
pieces.
it'll work its way out, but I think this is maybe we can the novelty of having Brad here, and maybe we can dive into that
Yeah,
is,
the
is that
modernization. Because Brad, you must feel that like there's the way we grow things, right? And then there's the science that's pulled us into how we're growing things now. And both can be good, both can be bad. There's a science to making them both work right, right?
Yeah, I think, we kind of often phrase it as the art versus science conversation. There's an art of building crops. There's also the science of it. And so I think that we've seen some companies that thought that it was all art, and there's companies that thought it was going to be all science. There's been a lot of companies that have come into the ag space and said, oh, this is just a data problem, and we're going to solve this with software as a service, and farmers are going to use it. And those companies are no longer with us because they neglected to learn from the art of it. So I like the way that you phrase that, Katie. It's a blending of both worlds, and the one that can blend the art in with the science, I think, is definitely going to win.
Yeah.
Should we dive in on Beck?
Yeah, so let's dive in, Brad, to the work that you're doing at Beck's. I mean, let's talk about the art and the science of what you're doing in the seed science world.
Yeah, no, thank you guys very much for the opportunity to join you. We love opportunities when different segments and different verticals can work and learn from one another. I've taken a whole page of notes, so this might go a little long here, but no. So yeah, again, my name is Brad Fruth. I currently serve as a director of innovation at Beck's Hybrids. Just to kind of frame things up, at Beck's, we are an independent family-owned company. We're selling corn, soybeans, wheat, and forages to farmers in about 80% of the United States. We are the third largest seed company in the United States behind our national competitor friends. So we also are a little unique in the fact that we also go to market through a farmer dealer network. So most of our products are sold by farmers that live in an area and represent our product. So we currently have an entire.
Brad, can I stop you there real quick? Yeah. Because as the economic development person in the room who focuses on economy, I want you to just go back to that point a second, because I think it's important for people listening to understand that a little more around that you said farmer dealer, like what there sounds like there's a benefit to the farmer in that's important to double click on. So double click on that real quick.
Yeah, thank you for picking up on that, Katie. So we do have salespeople. Their primary job, though, because of the scales of economy that exist in agriculture, cannot maintain enough relationships for this equation to work. So we basically employ independent farmers that represent our product. So think of it as a consultant, or they're not an employee of Beck's. We sometimes call them dealers. Okay. And so they we know that, so there's the three-legged stool of any business, right? Price, product, and service. We let our national competitors spend all the money in product. We have competitive product. I like to tell people we don't have the best price, but we have the best customer service, hands down. And so having those farmer dealers is an important role. Farmers in their lifetime will only grow 40 to 50 crops if they're lucky, right? I mean, in row crop country, if one time per year. So imagine, Katie, making your entire income for the
40
year.
crops for your lifetime. Like, this is my career. If someone says, what did you do for your career? I said, I grew a crop 40 times.
So think about the analogy that you just brought up about the older nurse. Like, what if a nurse only had 40 diagnoses for her entire
life? I treated 40 patients in my career. Right. Yes. Can you imagine, Ellen?
Yeah. So the economies of scale go that if you want to build relationships, it's going to be impossible to do that over a lifetime when you're only doing 40 iterations. So those independent farmer dealers live and work in their areas. And so our sales guys, their primary job is to help support dealers. It's been we're a company of growth. We're growing 12 to 15% every single year. Again, we do that through a high service model. The only thing that I'll just kind of add as some background is that we do currently have our own corn breeding program. And then we source soybeans, wheat, and other stuff from a number of other genetic companies. So one of the things that's interesting about us at Beck's too is that we work with all of our national competitors. We all buy and sell traits and genetics with one another. And then I graciously say our salespeople hate each other. So at Beck's, we truly have a unique perspective of a melting pot of all the available technologies in the row crop space of what's coming to market. So our product people are truly independent and biased. So it's not always Beck's products that make the lineup. Sometimes those come from Bayer or Corteva or Syngenta or BASF. And so our corn breeders, as I say, have the toughest job in the world, is that they're not only competing against each other, but they're competing with a lot of other breeders there. So
yeah, so something to add here, just so people understand the industry structure. So many of the seed companies also sell chemicals and other services. Beck's sells principally seed. And Brad, I don't know if you could go into a little bit what you do with the PFTR and
no. So that's a good point, Carter. You know, our competitors are global chemical companies that are selling a suite of different products. We've chosen to concentrate on seed. To Carter's point, we have 6 value adds at Beck's Hybrids that we give a farmer that's baked into a bag, whether they want it or not, because we're focused on driving net farm income for farmers. And so those value adds are, we have a free replant program. All of our seed is also treated to protect that seed as it goes into the ground and gets started. We have a trip program. Farmers want to go spend a week on a beach somewhere in the middle of winter, we can definitely do that. So one of our value adds is also Farm Server that we provide. It's a software as a service tool for our dealers and customers. We have a commitment rewards program that we reward loyalty through large capital items. And then finally, Carter, to your point, is our practical farm research. So practical farm research was started back in the 70s by Sonny Beck, where he wanted to learn how do agronomic things in the field equate to real ROI. And so today that's blown up. We have about 12 locations and over 2,000 acres of ground that we devote to these really 8-row plots where we're testing agronomic things. This has nothing to do with selling hybrids. So these are things like planter spacing, planter timing, what fungicides, what time of day should I put fungicides on? There's 130 studies that we're doing every single year in a controlled environment, and we take them all to ROI, not necessarily yield. This is all work that farmers love to do themselves and have the best of intentions, but don't always have the time or talent to be able to pull those off. So we publish all that data for free for farmers. We print about 45,000 of these books every year. As I say, they exist on the back end of most farm shop toilets. But we make it all available online and then also through a number of tools on our digital platform.
That's awesome.
And so the practical farm research is really a way also for new things that come out where we can test those. Practical farm research can be a great thing. It can also be a bad thing. If there are products on the market where maybe the marketing folks get out a little bit in front of what the product is, then also that can provide some not very favorable results, because we publish the results, whether it worked or not. And that's how we really maintain that independent.
Well, we've never seen that happen in the food space. I mean, I've never seen social media get out ahead of where we know the science is in food and health. Brad, as you're talking about this, I'm wondering, I mean, you're the farm guy, I'm going to call you on our quartet today. We talk a lot about regenerative and cover crops and, biofortification and, what are we doing to make agriculture double down on the quality of what it's producing, both from an environmental standpoint. At the Institute, we call it sustainable nutrition. How do we make sure that what's coming out of the ground is good for the body, good for the planet, using these new techniques? I'm wondering what of these you guys are talking about in your world.
Well, and yeah. Katie, Katie, can I throw in one quick thing, which is
Yeah,
I
of
think a
course,
lot of
Ellen.
people, well, I think a lot of people, when you answer that, Brad, I think a lot of people that don't know anything about the agricultural side of things, but just sort of have these stigmas. Can you explain how the science behind what you're doing doesn't fall into the bad guy bucket? That makes sense?
Yeah, no, both are great points. So the conversation, well, so there's a lot of similarities to the conversation that I heard you guys have in the beginning of the conversation, right? So when you talk about what are the ways that people are incentivized within the healthcare system, the same thing exists in agriculture, right? And so right now, farmers are in. So I always tell people farmers will do whatever you incentivize them to do. Just be careful of the incentive and make sure that you're incentivizing the right behavior. So farmers are incentivized on yield. And that's how all farmers, if you're selling into the general commodity market, are done. Carter and I have had extensive conversations that in order to force change, there's a potential that vertical integration has to happen to be able to force a new incentive structure. So to your point, Katie, if you walk onto a farmer, let's say in the I states, right, in Indiana, Illinois, or Iowa, and say, have you thought about no-till or cover crop? They're probably going to laugh you off to the farm gate. We have a no-till study that's 35 years old at our main office. Cover crops, my grandpa did cover crops. So these technologies are not new. And I would say that farmers that have a strong advantage to them do take advantage of those. And farmers do everything they can to protect the biggest line item on their balance sheet, which is land. And so I tell people that, I live on a 6th-generation family farm in Indiana. Every generation has done what they thought was the best thing to do with the technology available to pass that land down. So to your point, Ellen, farmers are not the bad guy. Secondarily, farmers are also not in overalls with a pitchfork chewing on a piece of wheat, wondering what in the world they're going to do. The amount of data that they have is absolutely incredible. Technology is coming at them at a fast pace, often changing faster than the rate of change in the cropping system. And so the opportunity that I think that we have, especially when we talk about how do we change some of the cropping systems to focus on nutritional density or what I would call direct grain attributes. So these are things like oil, protein, the actual substance of it. I think that there's a potential for partners to come together to incentivize farmers to do that. We see that today in what we would call IP grain or identity preserved grain that goes to China, to Japan, to the Philippines for tofu. I mean, there are beans sold today that farmers get a premium where when they unload the container in Japan for tofu, they can say the exact field that it came from, the exact protein content. The same thing exists right now in an oil market in the United States for high oleic beans. There's also non-GMO bean programs. There's what we call hard endo corn that's used in corn wet milling. So these markets have existed. As our supply chains are fairly complicated, just like they are in healthcare, some of the incentive structures have to be, I would say, realigned.
Yeah.
To Carter's point, when we start talking about a $3 a bushel premium in soybeans, that's a really, really, really big deal. Very little of that actually trickles down from the consumer down to the actual farm gate. So, Katie, I don't know if I answered your question or just jumped on a soapbox.
You did. I think no. I think it's an important soapbox, and I think you answered some of Ellen's points too, which is, we think of these things as new and trendy, and buzzwordy, but your point is they've been around for a while. It's that if the incentive structure isn't aligned, and Carter, I'd love your thoughts on this, but we talk about tipping points where might be really talking about incentives, right? And did the incentive structure suddenly line up in a way that regenerative is now, or cover crops that we hear so much about are now starting to increase? Like, what's been the shift that suddenly this is so buzzy? And is it actually an increase in usage, or it's an increase in the buzz around the desire to have it used?
Yeah,
I
so
don't
I
know
think
there's new incentives around it, are there?
it's a little. I'm not sure we're gonna be able to resolve it in this podcast this time, but we
Come
can.
on, Carter.
And that is,
Finish this segment up. You
let's
can.
talk about what Brad's saying. That Brad and I have had this constant conversation about horizontal versus vertical. So horizontal is I want to produce corn at a low cost and serve the world to end famine. Boom. I'm gonna make sure all the little steps are simplified. Vertical is I'm a milk co-op, a dairy co-op. I add some new filtering technology. I put a new brand on it. I make the protein denser, and I take care of animal husbandry, and I enter the market as Fairlife through CrossFitters.
Yeah.
And in how you optimize those two systems is different, and the incentives at one level, we've had an incentive system around bushels per acre, and we went from 20 bushels an acre to 270 now in corn. Did I get that right? I get my two.
Yeah, it's about corn's probably trading high threes, low fours right now.
Okay, and it keeps going up. So that an acre. So that we did that since 1935 or so, or something like that sort. So that's the incentive thing. I think what started to happen, and we haven't lined up the incentives. BlackBerry was cool because you could text more easily, and then iPhone went to there. So we're maybe at a BlackBerry moment a little bit, in that the climate crowd has come in and sort of said, we care about climate, and we've hooked on to regenerative, and they're sort of doing it that way. But then the real trick that's going to happen on incentives is when you have Ozempic out there fooling around with the food system a little bit and changing people's attitude. You've got climate, and then you've got families worried about healthcare costs. Those things are sort of separate right now. The incentive system is coming down from the CPGs and from the
Right.
marketplace saying climate, climate, climate. But regenerative agriculture is first and foremost about nutritional density. And the geek in me is, and the positive externality is climate. So
But
regenerative
I think
is,
the narrative out in public is that's reversed. I think the popular narrative is that it's being driven by climate, and I think most people don't know it has a nutritional density outcome.
and so the analogy I would then flip back to is sort of buzz around BlackBerry before you had buzz around iPhone. And we were just, as soon as these things line up, which will happen, it's the lining up is all this craziness is going on, and I don't understand what these people are doing on the other side of the fence. And the purpose of what we're trying to do in this discussion is get the different sides of the fence to see each other. So we are at the center point of speeding this up.
But those are consumer things, Carter. I mean, those were consumer moments. I mean, Ellen,
Yes.
Brad, I'm thinking about if we're talking about incentives, what are those incentive tipping points in a healthcare system, or the incentive points in the government incentive system, Brad, right? Which I imagine has got to happen as well.
Yeah, I mean, a large amount of the cover crop acres have increased because of government incentives, whether they're state conservation funds or they came through the Climate Smart Ag program that the Department of Ag does. To Carter's point, we've kind of had to boil things down into two buckets. Really, there's direct grain attributes, right? And then there's non-grain attributes. So, but you need to understand what you're doing. So to Carter's point, if you just say, well, we want to increase cover crop, and they think that they're increasing protein density, like just say you want to increase protein density. Don't drag this element in that you think is affecting it, but it actually isn't. So if you go to somebody in Kansas and say, have you tried cover crops? They're going to go, I get 3 inches of rain per year. Why would I do that? You go to South Dakota, North Dakota, they're going to say, I have a really short growing season, and you want me to fart around with cover crops for 10 more days? And so that's where instead of just saying, I want to grow a higher protein crop and I'm going to incentivize you, just do that. And so most of the time in this space, we spend a lot of time, even the term regenerative can be like, okay, what do you actually mean by that? And are you trying to increase water? Are you trying to increase soil carbon? What is the actual thing that you're trying to move? And I wrote this point down, and I kind of wanted to bring it out. We have a phenomenon in ag that I think is also occurring in human health, and that is that we've had so many technology advancements. We went from farming farms to farming fields to to farming management zones to now we're to the point where we're almost farming plant by plant. And it's because of the increased adoption of high-powered diagnostic tools almost now in real time. And what I heard, I think what's happening in healthcare is we're seeing the same thing, right? I don't have to wait for a lab anymore. I've got this thing I can pop on my arm. I got this thing I can spit on. Like, there's all these. So as these diagnostic tools are becoming better, some of it also is we don't know what we're moving. And so if you say, well, we want to increase soil carbon, and now I've got a machine where literally I can go out in real time and say this spot has this soil carbon, we almost now are like, well, was it really soil carbon that you're trying to move? And I think in the human side, when you start talking in the diagnostic space, there aren't enough options out there for those people that want to micromanage all of those values. And now the industry is saying we need more options.
That's interesting, is the precision word, right? So we have precision agriculture, precision health, precision medicine, precision, right? Like technology is bringing that precision word up in a ubiquitous way, right, Ellen?
So yes, and I think what's interesting is the alignment of the economics. So I think in some ways, as you pointed out, Brad, there's very much a parallel of the economic alignment or misalignment between agriculture and in the agricultural industry as well as in the healthcare industry. But I think where your point about the diagnostics and all of the technology is, that's where Katie's very first question about employers has a massive impact, because whether it's, now let's step up all the way up to the top, which is who owns the insurance risk, right? Who's making the benefit design decisions? It could be the government. It could be a health plan. It could be an employer, right? That's where the missing link of economic alignment comes in, because all these advancements that you're talking about, Brad, you have to demonstrate that there's enough of a value, enough of a reason to include those in the benefits. And so to your point, if we want a new set of diagnostic tools or diagnostics like labs, you go to your doctor, you get your annual wellness visit, right? There's a set of labs. You get a CBC, you get your LDL, you kind of know the standard, right? But that's the point about function. That's a whole different set. It's diving deeper. Well, guess what? If you asked any doctor, I would say that the majority of them that have continued to push their education through their lifespan as a doctor would say, oh, we have a lot of tools that we should be utilizing for diagnostics, but they would say, but we don't use them because they're not covered, right? They're not paid for. So I think regardless of industry, we have to look at economic alignment.
Right, which is the
and
same for
in
agriculture,
healthcare,
right? You're right, Ellen. Yeah.
So there you
go. Katie, something to add here just in terms of this precision, so to speak. Instagram, I think, was bought for $1 billion with 10 employees. There's some talk about the first trillion. What will it take for the first $1 trillion company to be created with AI with one employee? Wow. The analogy here is, it is 50 years ago when we tried to produce more food, you needed ADM and Cargill to put in huge infrastructure to get things done.
And you still needed really cheap labor. Yeah.
And you needed Monsanto to spend a huge amount of energy in the 80s, close to like the launch of the Apollo mission to get control of genetics. So it took a lot of resources. Now, as the resources become easier and more achievable on the healthcare side and the ag side, we can speed up the process of innovation, and you don't need to go through the toll of, I got to go through Monsanto, I got to go through ADM, I got to go through.
You can do CRISPR in your garage.
You can do CRISPR in your garage. Don't worry, Dad, I'm just editing my genes.
Just editing my genes, no big deal.
So what that means, though, is will the market shift? Well, then the question is, the market will shift if there's consumer demand. We didn't know what the consumer demand was for the iPhone before, and the signal that there's consumer demand, there is signal that there's consumer demand.
Yeah.
The one is people are willing to pay $1,500 for Ozempic cash. So there's demand there. That's a price point. As that price point comes down to $100, that'll be 80 million people that are
Which
sort of.
Which it is. That the compounding centers are bringing that price down.
And so the thing that we should respect here is that most human beings, no matter what their economic level, want to live longer.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody can show that the food that they're eating also solves the health, nobody's happy about going to the doctor. No one's happy about getting metabolic disease. So it is the one truth that I think is missed is that every human being will spend more money if they believe that the food that they're eating both solves their calorie and their health needs. They
If
will
they
pay
have
more money. They will change their decision.
Maybe
if they
we
have
have
the ability,
we
yeah.
also have a strange cultural norm around food, which is around freedoms in this country. I'm a free American and I can eat what it's the smoking argument, right? Like, don't tell me how to take care of myself. I'm going to tell me how to take care of myself. And if I've got to die young, eating happy, I will. Like, there's a whole group of people that still,
And a
I don't know whether
tremendous
that's a tagline because
tremendous economic disparity. So when you add up the lack of health literacy when it comes to food, so I'll call it food literacy, and it's linked to lifestyle disease. People know it's linked, but they have no earthly idea how to go after it. So if you add that to the cultural variances with food, I mean, just culturally how different we all eat, and how to change that, and then you add on top of that what feels to most people. Most people feel that it's more expensive to eat healthy, and I think that's a stigma we have to change. And that gets back to your point, Carter, about the grocery. Like that
Yeah,
the grocery store could support that.
it's a comment. I just want to be really precise about my comment, which might be overly geeky. So Nielsen did this work and they looked at every social economic level. And they found that the inherent desire to be healthy, a latent desire, was there. It may not have been expressed because they can't access it easily. And often that access issue is not an economic issue, it's even an availability issue. They saw people wandering through the grocery store trying to find where that healthier food was.
Yes.
And burning a whole bunch of time, which is cost, searching it. So as we think through this, it's not that people want to be unhealthy. That there's a
Agreed.
certain perception, I think, times that people don't care about their health. I think it's better to just,
bingo.
if you're trying to solve this problem, it's better to look at the problem that says people inherently want to be healthy. We're programmed to be healthy. Our genetics drives us to that. There are things in the way. And some of those are pure economics. Some of those are situational. Some of them are delivery. And if innovators focus on that, they will find a willing market.
I think so. The challenge, I think, Carter, it's interesting is you don't, like Ellen, you said in the beginning, you don't know what you don't know. When my husband got healthier and lost a bunch of weight, his reaction was like, I didn't know I could feel this good. I just thought as a male in my 50s, I was supposed to feel kind of meh because I'm in my 50s. And I thought that's like what part of the deal was. And he lost like 30 pounds and he's like, holy crap, I didn't know that I could feel like this. And that was a really interesting revelation. Now that motivated him to want to feel better. And I think it's about, people have to have that aha moment too, to realize there is a possibility here for me that's not the one I'm in now. It's not easy to get to.
Yeah.
My husband and I regularly comment when we see folks that are not healthy in like a large group of, right, when you're kind of in the general population, you look around and you can feel a little bit sad. We always say, if only I could wave a magic wand and let everybody in this crowd wake up tomorrow and feel healthy, just this is what it feels like when you take care of your body. You could just give people a glimpse to that. But I still go back, Carter, I 100% agree with what you said. And I think it's actually a real problem societally that people don't believe that. There was this, Eminem is now rapping about diabetes. And I thought people would really enjoy the debate around that, like what that means, the significance to me that entails with pop culture. Instead, it incited this debate about fat shaming. And that wasn't the point, right? The point is that I do believe what you're saying, Carter, that people do want to be healthy, but our society has gotten to the point where, because so many people are quote unquote perceived as having given up, we've created this stigma that like, oh, people just don't care anymore.
Right.
I don't think that's true.
The
So if
cultural
we're trying
norm.
to drive a tipping point, we can't solve all the world's problems at one fell swoop. We're trying to move to a tipping point. And
Yeah.
again, let's put us back in the iPhone analogy. The engineers at iPhone were thinking that they were going to create this thing, and they had some vision of what that might be. And if you read the story, it goes back to the original MP3 player. So it's not like they just stumbled upon this one day and said Shazam. But the way that all people innovating around this should lean to get into the stream that's going to get bigger, bigger, and bigger, it is important to know that there's this inherent demand out there. And so our job as innovators is maybe to line a few of them up. And we're not going to get them all at once. There could be some early adopters and some late adopters. But and then as that influence starts to influence the system over a 10, 15-year period, we'll see a shift. Right now, the mentality is sort of the Rockefeller model. You do whatever you want, you get sick, and we're going to have unbelievable healthcare for when you get sick. Science-based, incredibly good. And the shift that's going to change in people's mentality is way back away from the Rockefeller model of health, which was sort of established in the 20s, and get back to the mode that there are things you can do in your normal day to avoid it so that you never even have to have the conversation. And our job as innovators is to know that that's going to sort of happen, but then figure out our lanes right now that are profitable. And this verticalization, the sort of Fairlife is one set of SKUs in the grocery store. There's 60,000 others that may go through the same kind of verticalization, and part of it will be Beck's out there. They used to be focused on yield, and now they're working on grain attributes because those are valuable in the system.
And what's interesting too, Brad? I was gonna say Brad's got four daughters. Brad,
Yes, yep.
4 daughters. So it's also interesting having kids around the house and seeing this new generation, the food system through their eyes, right? Brad, especially.
Yeah, I mean,
I have 2 daughters as well, and my daughters navigate the grocery store in a much more educated way than I did, for sure.
No
They're
doubt.
on social media learning about food. They have more questions and want to know more about their own health. I think they're more aware of health conversations. Brad, I'm curious, like, what are some of the conversations, Brad, that you guys have with four daughters under your roof about food? How does what you do trickle down into the dinner table?
Yeah, so we are very, very blessed to live on our family farm. And so, we actually, on our family farm, we raise hogs and we raise a lot of our own protein. And so one of the things that, is definitely different is that we don't go to the grocery store for protein. That comes out of the freezer. And so we've tried to make a big conscious effort. They're not afraid to grab whole protein, right out of the freezer and cook something up. There's not, I would say we also, like gardening and, have a fairly big garden. My sweet corn game was off this year, so our sweet corn got put in about a month late. But, we also like to think about seasons. And so as being a Midwesterner, we don't think about that. We're used to going to the grocery store. So our girls are used to going either to the canning shelf or to the freezer to grab vegetables and things of that nature. And if it's January, if you're buying a fresh vegetable, you're realizing that it's coming from somewhere else. And so I think we've tried to make a concerted effort, and our girls understand that. Now, if we're in the middle of an urban center, I think Culver's is their favorite place. I mean, they love fried food just like anyone else does, right? But we've really tried to concentrate on a lot of whole protein, and then definitely know where your food comes from, and how it necessarily got there. I mean, we've had. I think the girls are a little embarrassed. A couple of months ago, I might have gotten in an argument in a grocery store because I saw a sign for non-GMO strawberries. And, I had to remind the produce manager there that there was no such thing as a GMO strawberry. So we also talk about food labeling and how a lot of it is crap. And so that's why it's important to kind of know where all your stuff comes from. So.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Katie, you brought up CRISPR in the garage. If you allow me the conversation, we have this argument, being the farmer here, I think our industry definitely learned its lesson when GMOs came out and the consumer feel around that. CRISPR is a very interesting conversation. So I would love to hear, if I could flip it a little bit on you guys, what is healthcare? How do you think consumers view CRISPR products and CRISPR editing?
You mean as it relates to agriculture?
Well, so if I were to walk in and say I have a CRISPR edited vegetable,
Oh,
or I have
yeah.
something that's more healthy, like is there a link between GMO and CRISPR? Because if you walk in and say I have a GMO sweet corn, often people will shun that because of the negative social connotation around GMO, not understanding that there's no earworms in it, and actually it's probably got more fiber in it, and it's better for you from a nutritional standpoint. So, do you guys hear of any social stigmas around gene editing that you think is detrimental to that technology?
Brad, you guys can weigh in on this. I have a lot of different conversations on this in different rooms. So, for instance, Ayana Bio is on my council, which is part of Ginkgo Bioworks, which is talking about how do we make food in a lab? How do we grow vegetables in a lab, right? I've got conversations with people around biofortification and certainly around Boston and MIT. And then there's obviously all of the gene editing stuff we talk about in Boston, the biotech industry. So we have in Boston, we talk about biotech that's therapeutic and biotech that's non-therapeutic, right? The one relates to food, one relates to the body. And it's interesting. I think customers are much more willing to lean into gene editing that will preserve their health. But I think on the food side, I think it's so complicated. People don't really know what they know. So people think organic and GMO means healthy, like we actually don't know. Like it could be an apple, right, Cotter, that says non-GMO organic, and it's been sitting in storage for 6 months, and it's a sugar bomb, and there's
Yeah.
not much in it, even though it might be organic and non-GMO. And so, and then people will say, well, there's GMO, but then there's just MO. There's just modification. Like it doesn't have to be genetic. I think that there is a lot of education we all have to do about understanding this. I think we have to remember that the GMO scare came around pesticides and what was going on with pesticides, and it was a very specific purpose. And look, I'm an environmental planner by training, so I completely am on board with understanding the chemical nature of our food system. I think that's important. But as the conversations evolved, I don't think, Carter and Ellen, I don't think we have evolved people's knowledge at the same time. Like as
Not
the
at all.
technology is, as the conversation evolves, we're not evolving the education of the consumer on this at all.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Jen, go ahead. Sorry.
I would just
Ellen.
say
Go ahead, Ellen.
when it comes to GMO, I wasn't even going to go there. I wanted to go there about 20 minutes ago for those that were listening, because it's such a sort of like whenever somebody says prevention or wellness in healthcare, it's like, don't say that. It'll just take us down a bad path. But to your point, Katie, I don't think anybody understands that GMO isn't a bad thing. Not anybody, but the average person, if you said it. And I think it's a complete lack of education around it. And the same with what you're about. I also think when we talk about food, I would be curious, Carter, if you've ever read a statistic on this when you talk about Nielsen, but I would garner that 80% plus of our population has no idea that there's a variation in nutritional density between the same foods. Like if you compare foods to foods, if you took a piece of kale
the fact that nutritional density changes in crops versus growing based on carbon in the soil. I think 99% of people don't understand that.
Yeah.
A few quick things on this. Gen Z is seeing CRISPR save their grandparents from cancer.
Right.
And so I think Gen Z is tech forward. We should remember a little bit of the GMO thing was protectionism in Europe. It was very specific political intent to prevent Monsanto from entering with high yield into Europe and affecting production there. There are additional concerns that there's a lot in the industry that the industry learned in terms of how to educate people. We've been breeding for a long time, but my general sense is the consumers have moved back to, technology has a plus here. The next thing that's going to hit, because we know we've made these investments, and it's, we should have Eric Smith on maybe on the next podcast, is we're going to start revealing what the actual nutritional components are of crops at a very granular level with some of the new technology. And then we're going to be able to show that this meat that looks fine has an omega-6 20x omega-3s, and is going to drive inflation and inflammation. So I think we're about to enter a market where we're going to really stir the pot at a very, very fast level, and that will drive a bit more of a throughput conversation of what are we really getting here in the end. And I'm not quite sure where that's going to go, but that is a genie that's not going to get back in the bottle. No one's all of a sudden going to say, you know what, we're going to put a ban to measuring nutritional density. It's not going to happen. It's just not. A few of us might be sent out back and thrown into a ditch for starting the trouble, but it's not going to stop the equation. So I don't know between GMO and exactly on CRISPR, but Brad, I think the short answer is CRISPR saved my grandparents, so maybe it's not that bad.
Well, and I think, Carter, you made a great point, which is, tech forward, but what's the outcome we're going for? So if the outcome's going that we're trying to save someone's life to, cure cancer, or is the outcome that we're trying to deliver healthy, chemical-free, nutritious, dense foods? If someone said, look, we're not going to need the organic label anymore because all food's organic, because we've been able to create modifications that have and technologies that have reduced the need or eliminated the need for pesticides. And at the end of the day, as you said, we've been breeding and modifying things forever, right? It's just about why you're modifying
40,000 years.
if you're modifying it so that you have specific applications, there was an economic incentive. I am not an expert in this, but my understanding is Monsanto had an economic incentive around what they were doing that was called into question, correct? And so this is big corporate America and people not trusting, and there being real chemical issues around glyphosate, all sorts of issues. I think people equate GMO with glyphosate with Monsanto. I think if we're going to have a smart conversation around this, we need to go back to basics and talk about the history of plant breeding and seed breeding and now trying to breed for different things, which would be like, let's not put chemicals into the system. I do not want a mother to have to choose between purchasing organic and non-organic at the store. I feel very privileged that I get to buy organic produce that's chemical free, but that is a privilege that a lot of people
careful, but you just made a cross there. There are a lot of chemicals you can use in organic.
Yeah, organic does not mean
yes, 100%. I completely
system that's not actually organic.
You got Brad and Carter riled up there.
About oats and all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's just that go, Brad.
Yeah, so Whole Foods caused quite a stir a couple years ago when they started to put labels on the organic and non-organic, right, and actually showed like water usage, and they gave sustainability scores, and the organic came out worse. So that goes back to the incentive structure, right? You got to be careful what the incentive is, because just because it says organic, there are lots of pesticides that are very, very harmful that can be used on the organic label. And so again, just if we're going to concentrate on nutritional density, it would be great to see those nutritional attributes on display at the grocery store.
Well, with
and
chemical,
let the consumer do that.
Yeah, and with chemical load.
Right.
That's all I want. But this gets back to information. Like, I pull this all the way up to the top, which is there is no source of truth, which I know, Carter, your point is that's being created, right? And then the other part of that, Katie, you brought up, which is people don't know what they don't know. Like, it's the educational component. And so engaging people in that. And I completely agree that I think Gen Z, I get all the gens wrong, so I don't know, right? But I think those that are younger than 18 today.
7 to 18.
Okay, right. So I was right. I was like, I think anybody under the age of 18 right now, they are set to demand that they own their own data. Like we're over here talking about healthcare as if, like I was thinking yesterday about EMRs and all that. That'll be another episode. But they're going to own their data, but B, they know how to get information. And whether it's right or wrong, that's a whole another debate. But that is where the key is. The younger generation, they're empowered that they can find whatever they want to find, and they're going to own it and know it, and they become experts. And that's very different than those in their 40s, 50s, 60s, etc.
Yeah. So we're wrapping us up toward a conclusion here, you guys. We're really going into the fourth part of our segment here. We kind of our third segment was around food is health. We kind of danced through it in and around it while we pulled Brad in and out of his segment and into this one. So I want to make sure that we're getting to our, to wrapping things up. And I think it's a good moment for us to pull, and we're talking about trends, right, and tipping points. And one of the tipping points, you guys, we talked about and is this GLP-1 tipping point that's happening, and the ultimate impact this is going to have on all sorts of things. I mean, is it going to create a lot more demand for some things, less demand for other? I think I read somewhere, you guys, that the demand for plus size clothing is dropping rapidly, which I thought was really interesting. Good. So we're seeing it in other parts of the economy, what the impact is of this. And so, just really quickly to you guys, Ellen, maybe I'll start with you on how's the GLP-1 economy creating the tipping points and disruptions from your standpoint?
Well, I mean, at the highest level in healthcare, everybody is terrified of how it could bankrupt healthcare at its current price point. So as it starts to be quote unquote covered as a benefit, which a lot of the gates for that to happen are being removed to allow it to be covered. I mean, there was a study, I wish I had written down the numbers, but I mean, it would flat out bankrupt the Medicare fund quickly, right? If we started allowing everybody to get Ozempic as a solution.
At this price point. At the current price point. I don't think the price point is fixed in perpetuity by any means.
No. But it again, it gets back to what's the point of healthcare? We've really designed a sick care system. And so the cause and effect. So if I go on Ozempic, and we've talked about this, like what are the side effects? Do I stay on it long enough? Do I make a long-term change? I think what hasn't been created in healthcare is the pathway of how Ozempic can be used to reverse lifestyle disease in an economically sustainable way. Right. And even at a personal level, how do I start with Ozempic and then get to a long-term sustainable, healthy lifestyle? And unfortunately, we don't have a healthcare delivery system that supports that. So we use this drug, as happens all the time, right? This new sexy drug comes along. It's the magic bullet, right? But you can't just have a magic bullet without a sustainable long-term plan. That's what's missing. That's what I feel like is really important for the healthcare industry in order for this to be successful from its perspective. I'm way oversimplifying.
Yeah, and I do think, Carter, we're in such early innings of this, right? I mean, if we're in a baseball game of this, I think we're still in batting practice.
Yeah, we're in batting practice. If you look at original statins, they had a lot of trouble with them. And I think that the pharmaceutical industry is trying to think about this as a statin. Currently, GLP-1s really has an 18-month cycle before it starts to decline in a material way. They have in pipeline drugs that are going to be tablet, $100 a month, will have secondary benefits. We're seeing reductions in kidney disease. We're seeing reductions in metabolic disease. We're seeing increased fertility. We're seeing a whole bunch of different things. And the causality is confusing. Goldman has said that if we could eliminate obesity, it would increase U.S. GDP 1% a year, which is unbelievable number.
Yes.
And so I think that it has put everybody's mindset into a mode of almost like, what do we do about obesity? And then we can flip the switch. There are grains, there are fibers that have GLP-1 like behavior. There's a shift in terms of diet that may lean that way. the people who get on Ozempic shift their desire towards nutritional dense. They have some of them are seeing like a shift in their preference. So you're seeing a 25% reduction in calories. So that's 25% reduction of demand. We need to make less food.
Well, and it's impacting the
45%.
addiction center of the brain too, right? So people who have a food addiction, just like any other addiction, it's impacting the addiction center of the brain as well.
You've seen alcohol reduction with it, so that sugar component of that addiction is fat down a little bit, and our natural nutritional programming from 350,000 years of evolution is sort of coming forward. You see a 45% reduction in ultra processed food demand for people on Ozempic. So I think that if you take all of that and put it together, it's close to pressure on the tipping point that says, look, we can, the things are lining up. We've got care delivery that's got to change. And I honestly think that this is a more radical viewpoint, is the whole concept of a PCP between AI and Ozempic and maybe grocery stepping in to deal with metabolic disease and nutrition metabolic disease. And maybe Novo and Lilly will say, you know what? We should not just sell Ozempic or Zepbound. We should deliver nutritional quality from a pharmaceutical health perspective. And maybe we don't need the classical doctor involved. Maybe we need to get closer to grocery and work with
that would be
nutrition.
my question for Ellen. I mean, like, who is going to hold the knowledge, right? So I think registered dietitians are quickly trying to, they're in this space and trying to make sure that that insurance could cover an appointment with them, especially if you're a cardiac patient, right? Which I think right now mostly RD referrals are in the diabetes space, but not in the cardiac space, right? If I'm correct.
Right. Well, a lot of that's
I don't know that for sure, but
yeah, I mean, a lot of that comes from just a
the way
misunderstanding.
healthcare is structured around it. And then, like, what is my nurse, like, if I go in and I never see my doctor, I see my nurse practitioner, right? Like, I don't think I've seen my actual doctor in probably 5 years. And so, what do these people know, right? So do they know about food? Do they know about healthy, balanced diets? When's the last time they had a conversation about fiber from food, Brad, instead of fiber from Miralax? I mean, I go to the doctor with my kids, my daughters, they just get told to guzzle down a bunch of Miralax. No one's ever told them to eat a bunch of fiber-dense food. And so, it feels like there's a congruent education, aggressive education that's got to go on at the same time, you guys.
Well, it's deep-seated. Yeah. I mean, it's deep-seated, Katie. It goes back to how healthcare is delivered. And I know everybody gets tired of hearing me say sick care, but we've designed a system to keep people alive. I mean, period. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all need it.
Yeah.
But we don't have a system, not the bulk of the system is not designed to help people thrive. And the vast majority of primary care physicians were not trained to deliver healthcare to their patients with lifestyle in mind. True lifestyle pillars, right? When you talk about nutrition, movement, social connection, sleep, right? All of those types of things. But food is at the core. So to your point, Katie, the majority don't. If you go to your primary care physician, majority of primary care physicians couldn't tell you how to create an entire lifestyle shift to reverse metabolic disease. They would have to refer you elsewhere. And I think that's the key. But then I agree with Carter. I think the model is going to happen. So I think people are completely going to be blindsided by AI in healthcare. I really do. The more I have learned about AI and behavioral nudging and language models and what's happening, the data and our own data, I've been putting a lot of energy into trying to figure out how do we leverage our own data? How do we give people tools to use their own healthcare data? Because that's the ultimate engagement, right? I mean, look at what happened with Fitbits.
100%.
So imagine giving people a tool, like Carter, I've been using Journeys myself to try to understand how it works from a behavioral nudging. It's a insulin resistance tool, like to help you actually reverse insulin resistance so that you can truly reverse metabolic disease, not like a lot of the solutions that are out there that are more about controlling metabolic disease. But that's the reality, is we have to put together a solution for people that they can own, they're empowered, they can utilize it. And I think we have to move, we have a shortage of primary cares. So let's take advantage of that and move primary cares back to the top of their license and create a healthcare delivery model where we're seeing our primary care physician maybe once a year, and we can do everything else virtually unless there's some other time that they need to lay eyes on us, and then use our own data to help nudge us and engage with it and educate us.
Yeah. Ellen, I'm gonna stop you there to make sure everyone's got time for a closing thought, because we're in our last 2 minutes. So Brad is our guest. 30-second closing observational thought you want to offer.
Yeah, I would just say that we're super excited about this emerging space. We don't have it all figured out. We know that great things happen in agriculture through partnerships and collaboration. So more than happy to continue the conversation with anybody that would see us as a potential partner to help them in this space.
Okay. And thank you for being with us today, Brad. It was
That's
really
my
great to
pleasure.
get your
Thank you.
perspective. Carter, closing thoughts you want to offer that might trickle us into the next time.
I think the thing that's on my mind, I saw my brother over the weekend, and it had been a little while, and he said, really the most terrifying thing for a parent every day is trying to figure out what's for dinner. and the notion, it sort of changed my thinking a little bit. That it is going to be consumer driven. Consumers have a lot of interest in having better food, better health. More information to that is going to cause the shift, and we really got to get into a mindset of let innovators get into that space, and then pharma and healthcare need to catch up to that world, and we got to sort of avoid healthcare having to be right in the stopgap in the middle of preventing that transition. If people want to pay more cash to get some of these things to get the bucket moving, that's good, but it's going to speed up, and we're going to have food as health in the end.
And I would just say, I think it's an exciting time to be alive and witnessing what's going on. I mean, as someone who's in economic development and observes change, trends and changes in culture and how that relates to the economy, something's happening. Something's happening here, as the song from the 60s would say, right? And Brad, the science, and Carter, the stuff you're seeing, and Ellen, the incredible insights you're seeing into healthcare. We can point out a lot of problems, but there's a lot of canaries in that coal mine sending some really interesting messages, and not just bad ones, but good ones. I think we're headed to a good place. So lots to talk about in the next time.